The next speaker is Dr. Renuka. I invite Dr. Renuka. Dr. Renuka is the director and pathologist at Chandra Diagnostic Laboratory. She'll be talking on laboratory evaluation of osteoporosis. Over to Dr. Renuka.
Osteoporotic fracture can develop, and about 1 in 5 men will develop osteoporosis. The combined lifetime risk for a fracture, either of the hip, the forearm, the vertebrae, is about 40%, which is equivalent to cardiovascular risk. But still, in spite of that, the attention which is given and the diagnosis which is done is much more lesser when you compare to cardiovascular conditions or other conditions. If you look into the Indian scenario, there's not much of statistics. I was just trying to look into that. There's not much of actual statistics. Whatever statistics are there are interpolated based on the hospital admissions, on the surgical procedures and so on. And it was estimated actually that a study was done which was estimated about 26 million was the figures in 2003, which was projected to increase to 36 million. And by 2020, it is estimated to record about 6 lakh hip fractures annually, a number that is expected to increase to 1 million in 2050. So a study was also undertaken in a low underprivileged area, and there they looked for the postmenopausal osteoporosis as well as osteoporosis in the 30 to 60 years. A BMD was done, and it was found that about 52% of patients had osteopenia and osteoporosis, and of this, probably many of them were not diagnosed because, and it could be because of the undernutrition. About 50% of the world's osteoporosis will be seen in the Asian countries by 2020, more than 50%. So what exactly osteoporosis is? It's a systemic skeletal disease characterized by low bone mass and the microarchitectural, it is deterioration of the bone tissue with a consequent increase in bone fragility and bone fractures. When it comes to osteopenia, it is only a deficiency wherein it has not yet gone to the formation of fractures, then it is called as osteopenia. Based on this and based on the bone mineral density, bone is a very organ which is dynamic organ, constantly modeling, remodeling, and it is very high in calcium, phosphorus. And based on the mineral and particularly collagen, 90% is because of the collagen. Based on these minerals that are present, BMD is the one which is very commonly used for the diagnosis, and it is usually done by a DXA scan. And here, if the bone marrow, bone mineral density is about 2.5 standard deviations lower than the normal, then you think in terms of osteoporosis. If the patient has a low BMD as well as a fracture, then it is considered as a severe osteoporosis. Who are the ones who are having osteoporosis? You could have localized or generalized, but what we'll be looking is basically the generalized osteoporosis. And as the aging occurs, there are basically two forms, the primary or the form as well as the secondary causes of osteoporosis. The primary osteoporosis, usually the most common, happens because of aging. So as age advances, osteoporosis develops. As I earlier itself mentioned, that bone is a very organ where there is a constant bone formation and resorption which is occurring. And with each cycle, this goes on increasing up to a young adulthood. Once a young adulthood or a peak bone mass is formed, then after that, about every year, 0.7% of the bone tissue is lost. And that is how, as aging occurs, the osteoporosis develops. So this is the most common form leading to either fractures. And the other one is the postmenopausal form, which is seen in women because of estrogen deficiency. There could be other secondary causes like endocrine disorders, say hyperparathyroidism, hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism, gonadal trophic dystrophy deficiencies, and poor exercise, as Dr. Dharman was just initially mentioning, that it is necessary that they should use more of weights, then smoking, alcohol, low body weight, liver and renal disorders, malignancies, particularly multiple myeloma and other metastatic disorders, as well as just immobilization. If the patient has some other condition like a stroke or a hemiplegia, then that can lead to generalized osteoporosis. So, as I said initially itself, it is well established now that the bone mineral density helps in predicting the fracture risk development in a case of osteoporosis. And but here though it predicts, it has also been observed that there are a lot of women who develop fracture risk even if their BMD is not very low, and older women with the same BMD as the younger women still have more fractures than the younger women. So why could this be? Because it could be because of other problems like a walking difficulty, because as was just mentioned, or it could be because of falling on the quality of the bone. All these are not considered when it is being looked into the bone mineral density. So that is why WHO has established a fracture assessment tool, which is basically an online, you can have this calculator, which was developed by the WHO task force in 2008 for providing a diagnosis for osteoporosis. This takes into consideration all the parameters other than which are causing the risk of fracture, in addition to bone mineral density, such as the age, whether the patient is a smoker, is he habituated to alcohol, does he take, he has been on glucocorticoids for the last 3 months, or if there is any family history of osteoporosis. Based on this, there is a fracture risk assessment done. All these are there, but then where does the lab come into the picture? And that is what I will be telling, not just of what we are doing, but also of what is going to come probably in the future. Whom do we evaluate? Usually is the postmenopausal women and men after the age of 50 for the risk of osteoporosis. A detailed clinical examination, a history, physical examination is a must. We have to remember there are a few non-modifiable risks, but many modifiable risks. And these modifiable risks can be treated very easily and avoid the development of fractures in these osteoporotic cases. So this, as far as the lab is concerned, lab has got a very limited role in the modifying. You can't do something for the non-modifiable risk, but it will help us in detecting the secondary causes, which are the more common, or the which are the very common causes, treatable causes for diagnosis of osteoporosis. Initially, a baseline investigation of a complete blood count will be done just to detect anemia. Anemia does not really contribute to osteoporosis, but it may be giving us an indication of some other condition that the patient has, like a multiple myeloma, or the patient may be having a malnutrition because of an alcohol abuse, these kind of things, and thus having calcium deficiency. This will help us in, CBC will help. The serum calcium levels, albumin, usually it is done to adjust the calcium, and phosphates. Hypercalcemia may reflect either an underlying malignancy or a hyperparathyroidism. And hypocalcemia, in addition, later on can contribute to the development of hyperparathyroidism. Creatinine levels usually indicates either a renal dysfunction, but it is also seen that the PTH levels, with PTH levels increase, the creatinine levels will be low. Alkaline phosphatase is a very important marker sometimes in the initial baseline investigations to detect any metabolic disorders, could be a Paget's or a metabolic bone disorder or osteomalacia, in addition to osteoporosis. And it also helps if you do a liver function test to differentiate for other alcoholic liver diseases and so on. A vitamin D level becomes a necessity initially, though there are many who would say that, probably yesterday I was just talking and he was saying that we would rather give the vitamin D to a patient than to do a test because it's much more expensive. So, but then when you look into the lab perspective for diagnosis, yes, definitely vitamin D might help, because vitamin D deficiency can predispose The problem is when you're suspecting very strongly, then you start thinking in giving in terms of vitamin D. But there are many a times, the first thing which I did was, when I have not checked my own vitamin D, let me go and check. And I was surprised to see such a low value. So that's what happens because we don't go out in the sun, we don't see, and we don't realize how important it becomes for us that we actually detect it at a much earlier stage. Magnesium is important because it's involved in the calcium metastasis. A decreased level is associated with osteoporosis, and serum iron, ferritin levels and other secondary causes like thyroid hormone investigation needs to be done. When you look at the biochemical changes, as I said, the most important of which are calcium phosphate, the parathormone and the alkaline phosphatase. In osteoporosis, all calcium phosphate, parathormone, ALP, all of them are usually in primary osteoporosis quite normal. They may not be, they will not change. And if it is usually in the other ones, like primary hyperparathyroidism, that you will find that there is an increase in the PTH and increase in the calcium and a decrease in the phosphate. And in malignant hypercalcemia, that the calcium levels are increased and PTH levels will be low. Vitamin D deficiency may have a normal or a decreased calcium and phosphorus and have a increase or a normal PTH or ALP. So they do help to some extent, but they are not completely useful in diagnosing the primary osteoporosis. So rather it is more useful the detection of the other secondary causes of osteoporosis, the lab investigations, that here for instance if a PTH level, if a calcium level is abnormal, then it would be advisable to do a PTH level, not otherwise. You can't just do the PTH assay for all of them. A 24-hour urinary calcium level may be done. Testosterone and gonadotrophins may be done in an elderly male person who is having a ESR and CRP, though not really useful for osteoporosis per se, it helps us in detecting other conditions associated like rheumatoid arthritis, which can again lead to osteoporosis. If a Cushing syndrome is suspected, if the patient has those symptoms, then a 24-hour urinary cortisol levels and dexamethasone, protein electrophoresis sometimes is very useful, particularly to detect if a patient has a very high ESR and a patient has anemia, then yes, I think electrophoresis would be warranted in these kind of patients. And sometimes a bone marrow biopsy when you're thinking of osteoporosis, particularly in hematologic disorders. But as I said, bone is constantly being formed, and whenever there is a bone formation occurs, there are something which are now a lot of new studies are there, particularly in the last decade, what you are coming up, which are called as the bone turnover markers or biochemical markers of bone turnover. These are the products which are generated during the process of formation or degradation of the bone. These are currently not used for diagnosis, but they are more useful for patients who are, for individualized patients who are on therapy either with biphosphonates or PTH analogs. So let us just come to the basic pathogenesis and physiology of bone over here. Osteoblasts are the cells which are usually rimming the bone tissue. These are the cells which activate the progenitor cells of the osteoclast by releasing the rank ligand, which go and attach to the receptors, the rank receptors which are present on the osteoclast, progenitor cells of the osteoclast. The activated osteoclasts, then they release the enzymes TRAP and cathepsin K. And these enzymes, the osteoclasts are the multinucleated giant cells. The osteoclasts are the cells which go on eating up the bone, whereas the osteoblasts are the bone forming cells usually. So the osteoclasts, these then activated osteoclasts release TRAP and the cathepsin, which break down the collagen 1 and form degradation products of when the resorption occurs. These degraded products which are released by the osteoclasts are in turn this is the osteoclast, the enzymes which are releases, the TRAP enzymes and the cathepsin K, which in turn release the collagen degradation products, because bone is, as I said, having a very high collagen 1 content. These degraded products again in turn activate the osteoblasts. The osteoblasts, which are having are rich in collagen 1, they release pro-collagen 1, which is again cleaved at the amino terminal and the carboxy terminal and collagen 1, and it also, in addition to it, releases the bone alkaline phosphatase and the osteocalcin. In this particular cycle, so this osteoblast again start acting. Once these are released, it also releases the osteoprogerin, which has a negative feedback on the rank ligand and the rank. It takes about 150 to 200 days for each remodeling cycle that happens. These are usually maintained by the rank ligand and rank as well as the WNT pathway. So there is a constant phase of activity and a quiescence which happens. What we will be now, a lot of studies have been happening on these degradation products and to look into these formation products which are there or called as the bone turnover markers or the biochemical markers of the bone turnover. So that is why these are actually classified as bone formation markers and the bone resorption markers. Bone formation markers either by the products of active osteoblast expressed or osteoblastic enzymes, like as I said, bone alkaline phosphatase, the osteocalcin type 1, serum type 1 procollagen, C-terminal or N-terminal, which is also called as C1NP or P1NP, and the bone resorption markers such as urinary hydroxyproline, and the whole list is there. The urinary total pyridinone and DPD, and then there are N-telopeptide, which are cross-links of the urinary collagen, and you do the urinary measurements of those bone siloproteins and tartrate resistant acid phosphatase. These have actually been there, but still if these bone turnover markers are there and you can actually detect the bone formation and resorption, why is it not included into the diagnosis of osteoporosis when it is so underdiagnosed? It's basically because the studies have been really inconsistent. There are a lot of markers which are available, but of these markers, they are all having a lot of biologic variation, both intra as well as inter-assay variation is there. The methods used are different. Some of them are, and the sample stability is also a major issue in these kind of assays which are being developed. And plus, in addition to that, when you are looking into these bone turnover markers, we also need to take that their relationship to other established risk factors. For instance, if the patient has rheumatoid arthritis, it is a condition where the bone is actually being eroded, and there again you may find a high BTM levels. So that in a case of an RA, the BTM levels will not be giving us a clear-cut idea, or a patient who is on glucocorticoid therapy. So these secondary causes which will also cause, and if a patient has already had a previous fracture, again the bone turnover markers may get modified. So the extent to which these actually predict fracture risk, independently considering into all these causes, because various studies have been done, each one saying it's useful, some would say it would not useful, based on what is the clinical condition of the patient, and also because of the inter-assay and the different so many markers which are available. That is why the International Osteoporosis Foundation actually recommended. So this is just a chart to show that there are so many of these markers which are there, and each one, some of them for instance, but of these, the ones which are urinary levels were done earlier, but now it has been found it's very cumbersome. It requires a 24-hour collection, and that is why, because of this, the sample stability was not maintained. So that is why now these are being done away with, and now what we are actually having is a serum measurements for the bone formation markers and the resorption markers. So the bone formation markers of this, usually bone alkaline phosphatase, osteocalcin, and procollagen were the ones which are used. But the International Orthopedic Foundation has recommended procollagen type 1, which gets at an amino terminal that is called as P1NP, as the marker of bone formation choice, so that there is further standardization which happens in the future. And they are tying up with various companies for this. And coming to the other markers like bone alkaline phosphatase, sometimes it could be very useful to do because see here, though usually the pro-collagen type 1 is useful, but it has a high circadian variation. It is influenced by the renal condition of the patient. So in bone alkaline phosphatase, it is not affected by renal function. So that is when a patient has a chronic renal failure, probably a bone alkaline phosphatase would be more useful than a P1NP. The bone resorption markers, of the so many markers which are available, there is only one marker which has been now recommended as the marker of choice, that is the carboxy-terminal cross-linked telepeptide of type 1 collagen. It is also called as CTX, it's also called as beta cross-labs. So there are, I'll just tell a little bit of this. The STX or the serum CTX, which is the carboxy-terminal cross-linked or beta cross-labs, it is the only problem with this is that it has a circadian variation, and so it becomes necessary that a morning fasting sample should be collected. Earlier these guidelines are not clear. Even when we used to do it in a lab, we were not really being specific on taking early morning sample to begin with. So it is now been very well clearly established that a morning sample is a must for this, and it is influenced by renal function. So at that time you have to use a other marker. It's available in 2 automated methods now. Currently, one is by the Roche and another one is by the SYS. So this is the 2 forms of automated systems. Once automation comes in and once the standardization of the assays it becomes much more easy for us to actually compare and go in an unbiased way in detecting these assays. P1NP, it has several function advantages and it is again bone marker of standard of choice, and it has an intact form and a total form, and again here there are 2 equipments which are doing by the automated method, but it has a low individual variability and is relatively stable at room temperature. It has been well established that the bone turnover markers decrease following the, so as I said in diagnosis that it doesn't have much role, but if you come to monitoring, it is now being used. The bone turnover markers are, it has been established that particularly the bone formation and the resorption markers, the serum CTX and serum PNP, they fall after starting the therapy of anti-resorptive therapy like biphosphonates or so, and decrease occurs within days following intravenous therapy and within weeks following oral therapy, and it actually reflects the inhibition of the osteoclastic activity because it decreases in resorption markers is followed by a later decline in formation markers. So the first one to actually come down is the resorption marker followed by the formation marker. So this is a resorption marker, it falls within here within the 3 months, and then later on it is the P1NP which has fallen. So now 2 markers of choice, that is the CTX and P1NP. And it's also been established that with when you start giving other anabolic analogs like PTH analogs, that time the bone formation markers increase. This is a urinary NTX actually and serum P1NP. I couldn't really find much on the other marker. And in case of strontian, however, there is a small increase in the bone formation markers and a decrease in the bone resorption markers, because it is still not clear, even though it is listed under the mechanism of action of this particular drug is not clear, though it is listed in the anabolic agents. So when you having a BMD which are useful for diagnosis, then why not continue to use it for even the monitoring? There is a problem that when you do a BMD, the changes in the BMD are usually very small, and a lot of variation has to occur before it can be picked up by the current DXA scans. So it takes about 18 to 24 months for it to come back to show a change once you start a patient on therapy. And whereas if you look at the bone resorption markers, it can be measured 3 months after initiation of an oral biphosphonate, and bone markers, formation markers after 6 months. And it has been very clearly shown that the bone turnover markers behave show much earlier changes and better changes than what has been with the BMD, because so that will actually help in the compliance of the therapy of the patient. So that is what. So there is one small flow chart which I have just taken up from the net. Once you have taken a decision to treat, you usually do, which is assisted either by a fracture risk calculation, what I said, which is a tool which is available along with BMD. Then you do a baseline bone turnover markers, because when you are going to monitor, you should have a baseline value. So the two markers of choice are the P1NP and the CTX, and you do for that, and after that see again monitor after 3-month visit, look for any changes is there in the turnover markers. If yes, then you can reassure the patient. Probably the compliance of the treatment will be better for the patient when you show that, see, there has been a change in the value and that he is doing better. And if not, then review, and then later on again look for whether the patient is actually taking the medication, or if there are any other issues like malabsorption because of which he is not responding, then treat the cause. If not, change the therapy. So just to summarize, lab evaluation of routine biochemical parameters have a limited role, but useful chiefly to rule out the secondary causes, and bone mineral density and the fracture risk assessment score which is being used is more useful for diagnosis of the risk calculator. This FRAX is actually available on the net. Anybody can use it. You just have to feed the data and you can get the complete assessment of how much is the fracture risk. But bone turnover markers are independent predictors of fracture risk. But though there are much more workup which is required, considering the other pathological conditions and fractures for further changes. These changes are useful, but the changes in the bone formation and the resorption markers are useful for treatment in patients with monitoring osteoporosis. Currently, there are two markers of choice, the P1NP and the CTX, which has to be done at a baseline level and again after 3 to 6 months, and bone formation markers such as has to be done after 6 months only, because they respond 6 months later. So just to say that, yeah, osteoporosis very much underdiagnosed. Probably at this juncture, we don't have a very good diagnostic test for diagnosing osteoporosis, but with the kind of work which is going on, and lot of studies are required, of course, to evaluate which of this is going to be good and how much we should take, how much it would be useful for a patient. And a lot of studies need to be more, because there's nothing like a targeted therapy, but probably at least for the monitoring of therapy, there are going to be some studies which will show that you can actually monitor the patient with this bone turnover markers. And maybe then the costings would also be coming down for this test, because cost becomes a very major factor. So currently these are expensive, but they would come down probably when more usage happens on those tests. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for a radiate discussion on assessment tools as well as the bone turnover markers. We can have 2 to 3 questions. Dr. Mahendranath, sir.
Thanks, Renuka. Very informative talk. Are these tests, CTX and PNP, are they available, and how expensive are they?
So not about 2,500, 2,000 for each assay.
Can you suggest one single inexpensive test if it is needed?
Single inexpensive test.
Yeah, either for bone turnover or...
For patients, if they are on biphosphonate, the resorption marker, so P1NP, otherwise the bone formation marker PTH. Then you have to give, yes.
About 2,000.
Yes. And these are available, sir, automated, and we are doing it also actually, beta cross labs.
Available all over or only selected centers?
Few centers, but they are available. Not many centers, definitely just 1 or 2.
Thank you.
Not feasible?
Yeah, I think it can be used, because this is a tool which is easily available. You can download it on your laptops or whatever and use it wherever you go for your camps also. And it is probably the softwares, I don't know whether they have to be purchased, but I know that probably, but they are easily available. You can just feed the data and you get. There are a lot of calculators of this kind which are available, the fracture risk.
The FRAX tools, can it be used alone, or it should be used with BMD?
With BMD.
with BMD?
I think so.
About
But anyway,
fracks,
probably Dr.
about
Acharya is
fracks, I
expert
have
in
used
that
it
field.
extensively. When you go to the frac site, the beginning it asks you whether you have a BMD with you or not.
Oh,
So both ways it's possible. There's a flow chart. When you say you have BMD with you, it follows a different path. When you say I don't have a BMD, it follows a different path. It basically gives you the fracture risk. How many times you have more fracture risk compared to a normal person of your age and your habits. Because a lot of questions are related to the habits there. And as far as
Yes.
the
Age, alcohol, smoking.
tests are concerned, most of the pharma companies which are promoting the osteoporosis related products, they are offering 3 vouchers for screening to look for prognostic indicators. And they give from the standard laboratories the vouchers.
Okay.
Yeah. So the three vouchers are given, which are done at 3 monthly intervals. Basically,
So
P1,
they must be having a
P1
tie-up
NP.
with
P1
probably
NP.
some.
Yeah, they are doing a tie-up basically. And
Madam,
about the BMD screening camps, as the name suggests, they are for screening to get the at-risk patient to the hospital for further assessment and further treatment. It's very effective to conduct a BMD camps if you follow it up later in the hospital. Just for publicity, if you conduct in a village or somewhere, it just gives awareness for the time being, but it might not have any value.
These BMD camps are conducted in outpatient clinics. Are they useful?
They are useful for screening because they use an ultrasound. And ultrasound based BMD scans, the wrist scans are superior in India because the heel, most of the population walks barefoot. So you get a false positive results in most cases. We have found out from our
But they have a
experience.
specification that you should look only at the femoral thickness as well as, I mean that's what I've read. I'm not a
BMD
clinician.
screening camp uses only ultrasound
As well
machines.
as the heel and
Only
the-
ultrasound machines, either heel or the wrist. Whereas you're talking about DEXA.
Yes.
DEXA machine is about 21 lakhs worth, and it takes about 20 minutes for screening one patient. I mean, for testing one patient. It's not a screening tool; it's a testing tool.
It's a testing.
But if you are planning to invest on a CT scan in the near future, there are patches, software patches available to do. When you do abdominal CT, you can add the patch and get the lumbar vertebrae assessed, and it's as good as DEXA, as far as sensitivity is concerned.
Yeah, Dr.
Madam,
Acharya has been running a
this last
osteoporosis
question.
clinic. I think every 4 weeks he runs osteoporosis clinic. So he.
Ma'am, what's your say on prescribing calcium and vitamin D for osteoporosis in a community?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
What's your opinion or perceptions on prescribing calcium and vitamin D for osteoporosis patients without having any of these investigations done who come with vague symptoms? And this is a practice which we see commonly of prescribing calcium and vitamin D. What do you say on this?
Calcium and vitamin D has to be given.
Sorry?
So,
The question was calcium and vitamin D.
So,
it has to be
Yeah, we
given.
should-
is-
we
it
see-
has to be given
We
calcium
should
and
give.
vitamin D.
We should give.
But how to go about it, probably Dr. Yogesh will.
So what I meant was, majority of the practitioners, we prescribe calcium and vitamin D without any of these investigations as such when patients come with vague symptoms of myalgia and other things. So what you have your say. And when we go in for a community where none of these tests are available, so in such a situation, how do we go about giving calcium and vitamin D? Are there any specified guidelines on these issues? How to use about it is what my point.
When you have not done these assays and you're still suspected, and if the patient is older and you're feeling that there is a risk of a fracture, it is worthwhile to give calcium and vitamin D, but in the adequate doses so the patient doesn't have hyperpentinosis.
Vitamin D deficiency is very common in the community. So, unless you suspect hyperparathyroidism or some metabolic bone disease, you can universally give vitamin D to most of your patients for long term. For long term.
6 weeks.
And calcium, the requirement per day is about 1000 to 1500 milligram per day, depending upon the age
That's
group.
1000.
And it is advisable to take majority of the calcium by natural sources, milk products. Somebody has a milk allergy, doesn't take milk at all, then it is worth giving them any calcium preparation, 500 to 1000 milligram per day. But if somebody it's better to take 2-3 glasses of milk products. That will give them approximately about 700-800 milligram of calcium. Then anybody above 65 can be routinely supplemented. But the prescription of any 30-year-old lady going with the aches and pains, when the clinician doesn't know anything, they'll give a calcium. That probably is more art than science. You have to be seen doing something, so you do something. And patients are happy. So you feel that your calcium has worked, but it is more a placebo thing.
Can I add upon
And
this?
this, yeah,
Can
sorry.
I add upon this?
Yes.
The commonest source of calcium is milk and curd. 1 ml of milk is equivalent to 1 milliequivalent of calcium. Remember that. If you are giving 500 ml of milk to a patient, that means 500 milliequivalent of calcium you have already given him. The better source is curd. Advise the patient to have 500 ml of curd every day. That means around 1.5 milliequivalent of
750.
calcium is 1 ml of curd. So you can guess how much of calcium you will be supplementing. Do not give patient more than 1500 milligram of calcium in a day, because after that it is useless. It is not absorbed. Even if it is absorbed, it is useless, or it will be collected somewhere else. You know, nephrolithiasis and all those things. So that is the thing. And the next earlier question was how long the vitamin D. I asked my style is I ask the patient how young you are. The lady says, if she says I am 77, I tell her to add to take it for another 23 years minimum. Okay. You got it? So that should be the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. With that, we end up
Thank you so much.
we end the session 1.